Good morning, Mr. Seleka. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Chairperson.
Good morning, Dr. Ngubane. Thank you. Are we ready?
We are ready, Chairperson.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Chair. Chairperson, this morning, Dr. Ngubane has come back to deal with certain transaction matters at Eskom, and I believe that he's ready to take the oath of affirmation.
Okay, please administer, I think it's the oath.
Please state your full name for the record.
Baldwin Sipho Ngubane.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear that the evidence will give you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you for coming back, Dr. Ngubane. There is unfinished business.
Sengizocela inxiwa.
Yes, Mr. Seleka.
Thank you, Chair. Just by way of background, Chairperson, was Dr. Ngubane was here in the previous appearances. He testified on the suspension issues, and we ended at the point where in Dr. Ngubane's affidavit, he says that there was a serious vacuum as a result of the suspension of the executives. And we have to see how you fill that vacuum, Dr. Ngubane, and what happens thereafter as a result of that gap being filled.
That light which is normally on is not on, so it's...
Oh yes, I see that.
As a result, it's darker.
Yeah.
Somebody should attend to that. I don't know what's the story with this one. Yeah, okay. If it causes problems, then somebody must tell us. Okay, all right. Continue, Mr. Slayer.
Thank you, Chair. And the filling of that vacuum will take us into the matters that we are focusing on this week, Dr. Ngubane, which is the transactions in regard to the Tigeta matter in the main. And I will relate the facts, and you could confirm or otherwise explain what happened in regard to that. By way of a starting point, Chairperson, we will refer to Dr. Ngubane's affidavit, which is contained in Eskom Bundle 9, bracket A. Dr. Ngubane, I believe you have...
On my bundle, there is no indication that his affidavit was admitted last time.
Oh.
I don't know what your recollection is. I would normally write exhibit XYZ on it if it was admitted. So if we didn't do it, we should do it today.
Correct.
If we did do it, then I must just correct this.
Yes. Mine is also not marked.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
I suspect that we didn't admit it formally.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we should get that out of the way first.
Correct, Chair. Dr. Ngubane, Eskom...
What page was it?
Yeah, is the first document in the file. Just go to page 4.
Page 4.
Oh.
Yeah. Page 4, and we follow the black numbering. The black numbering on the left-hand corner, top left-hand corner.
At the top.
At the top.
Yeah, the black numbers on the
Just
top.
tend the
black.
time. No, go the
Left.
other way.
Oh, all right. Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. But go back, Dr. Ngubane.
I've got it, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He says he has got it.
Yeah, Dr. Ngubane,
Yes.
don't read yet. All we need to confirm is you look at the affidavit on page 4, affidavit of Baldwin Sipho Ngubane. I think you're on the wrong page.
About the 4 executives?
Yes, but I think you're on the wrong page. I want you to go back. Yeah, that's right, go back.
To the first page of the affidavit.
Over there.
Okay, all right.
Yes. The affidavit runs from page 4 of the paginated bundle to page 54. You need some assistance.
Go to page 54, black numbers at the top left corner.
Women and Gelfelen.
Just assist.
Might be a wrong file.
Page 54. Yeah. So page 54, that's the end of the affidavit, Dr. Ngubane. And there's a signature there above the deponent. You see that signature? Is that,
Sorry, just switch on there.
That's my signature.
yeah, that's your signature.
Yes.
And the affidavit is dated 4 August 2020. You confirm this to be your affidavit.
That's correct.
Chairperson, I'll beg leave to have it admitted as Exhibit U 19.1.
The affidavit of Dr. Baldwin Sipho Ngubane, starting at page 4, is admitted as Exhibit U 19.1.
Thank you, Chair. Then, Dr. Ngubane, page 22 of the affidavit.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, without interrupting Mr. Silika.
I think he forgot about you.
No, not at all.
Yes, please place yourself on record.
The name is Mkabela for Dr. Ngubane. I just would like to add, Mr. Silika would recall that there was a supplementary affidavit. I have not had mention of it, and I think for the sake of completeness, that too must be placed on the record.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Mr. Mkabela. That's,
Do we already have the supplementary affidavit?
we do have it. It's an explanatory affidavit of Dr. Ngubane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But it's an explanation of that the guarantee didn't come to the board.
Obviously, it will be important to know where it is in the bundle.
Okay. My junior will find it, Chair.
You can continue in the meantime, and you
Yeah.
can attend to that in due course.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, all right.
Dr. Ngubane, page 22 of your affidavit.
Page
22,
22.
yes.
Yes.
Page 22, paragraph 6.1.
Appointment of Mr. Molefe.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
So paragraph 6 point, the appointment and early retirement of Mr. Brown Molefe, paragraph 6.1 says, after the suspension of the 4 executives, including Mr. Matona, who was the GCEO, there was serious vacuum in the leadership of Eskom. You see that?
Yes.
That serious vacuum came as a result of the decision made by the board to suspend the 4 executives. But we know that one Mr. Koko, who was one of the suspended executives, does come back ultimately in July 2015. So Dr. Ngubane let's sketch this background, and I'll come back to this appointment of Mr. Molefe. This board is appointed, the board of which you are part, is appointed on the 11th of December 2014 by Minister Lynn Brown. Correct.
Correct.
The board has an induction on the 16th of January 2015,
Correct.
and they are taken through the operations of Eskom, what Eskom does, and so on. Correct?
That's right.
The board has a scheduled meeting on 26th of February 2015. That meeting gets to be cancelled on the eve of the meeting date.
Correct.
On the 8th of March 2015, the board receives an email inviting the board to a special meeting the next day, which is the 9th of March 2015.
That's correct.
It is at that special meeting that the board is told about an inquiry requested by the president. Mr. Tsotsi relates that to you. Correct.
That's correct.
And the board said, look, we are new, we can make this huge decision, let the minister, the shareholder representative come and address us.
Correct.
2 days later, the meeting with the minister is scheduled, 11th of March 2015.
That's correct.
From that meeting, you write in your affidavit, it became clear to us that the minister wanted the inquiry to be proceeded with and that the executives should step aside.
Correct.
And the stepping aside or suspension of the executives is executed on the same day. They are suspended on the same day.
Correct.
On the 19th of March 2015, the board has a meeting, and Mr. Tsotsi is in trouble.
Correct.
There is a vote of no confidence, which is ultimately acted upon in the meeting of 30 March 2015, where Mr. Tsotsi tenders his resignation.
That's correct.
The executives are suspended 11 March. The following month, on the 17th of April 2015, Minister Brown makes calls a press conference, and she makes a public announcement that she has decided to second Mr. Molefe to Eskom.
That's correct.
Now, you have said in your affidavit, page 23, paragraph 6.3. And this is dealing with how the secondment of Mr. Molefe came about. You say, whilst the search for a new GCEO was underway, the minister suggested that we consider Mr. Brown Molefe. The board was amenable to the minister's suggestion because we knew of Mr. Molefe's track record based on his work at the Public Investment Commissioners and Transnet. The board felt that Eskom was in dire straits and needed someone with Mr. Molefe's skills and experience. The minister suggested that the board approaches Transnet to request for Mr. Molefe's release to Eskom. And then you say, I wrote to the chairperson of Transnet. Now, the minister has put it slightly differently. In her affidavit, she says that the Transnet and Eskom boards negotiated discreetly the transfer of Mr. Brian Molefe and Mr. Arnoj Singh to Eskom. My role as the shareholder representative was to approve the negotiated outcomes. If I remember correctly from 2016, Eskom's MOI required me to be noted as a party to the appointment of CEO. I also seem to recall that there was a query about the legality of the transfers and legal opinion. But the emphasis is on her saying it was the two boards that discreetly negotiated the appointment or secondment of the two. I only came into the picture to approve the negotiated outcomes. What is your comment on that, Dr. Ngubane?
Well, we approached the minister, as I say, as I've stated, chairperson, to present our problem in terms of leadership of the organization. And she said Brian Molefe would help Eskom. And we're very happy with this, because in her own words, Brian Molefe had done a good job at PIC, Transnet, and so on. But also at a press conference, she said the secondment of Mr. Molefe was discussed with the Deputy President and President Zuma. Quite clearly, Chairperson, this was a very big decision, which could not have been undertaken just by the chairpersons or the boards of the two organizations. There had to be a higher authority to it.
Yeah. So prior to the decision, because we're dealing with the pretext to the decision, the minister says you negotiated the two boards discreetly. You are saying, well, the board, who approached the minister?
We did.
When you say we, who are you
The
referring?
PNG,
PNG.
yes.
That is the People and Governance
Governance.
Committee of the Board of Eskom.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I guess doing so on behalf of the board.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But the important point is, do you go to the minister with a name in mind, or is it the minister who suggests the name?
No, we wanted a secondment of a senior official, either in government or in one of the SOEs. And then she came up with the name of Mr. Molefe.
So the minister is the one who suggested,
Yes.
as you say in your affidavit.
That's right.
So you were looking at getting somebody who would take the position of Group CEO at Eskom.
On secondment,
But you wanted a secondment
while we were busy,
or looking.
yes,
So somebody who would act.
exactly.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, no, then I understand. So, and you were saying, well, it could be somebody in one or other government department or one of the SOEs.
That's correct, Chairperson.
But at that stage, as a committee, you did not have any particular name yourselves.
No, we didn't.
Oh, okay, all right. And the minister suggested Mr. Brian Molefe.
Yes.
Okay.
And she also suggested that we write the board of Transnet. So I wrote to the chairperson of Transnet.
Oh, okay, all right. Do you recall round about when it was that the PNG committee approached the minister Mr. Silega sketched out the background. The suspensions were on the 11th of March 2015. Mr. Tsotsi resigned on the 30th, I think, of March 2015.
Correct.
The minister announced the secondment of Mr. Brian Molefe on the 17th of April. In other words, 2 weeks after Mr. Zola Tsotsi had resigned. Do you have a recollection of when it might have been that the PNG committee met with the minister?
I'm not too sure.
Yes. Do you think it would have been before the end of March?
It should have been around there because the annual report and financial statements were totally disappointing. I mean, the auditors had put an emphasis of matter in their report, which meant Eskom was not a going concern. And also the debt, I mean, the previous CEO, Mr. Matona, had written or informed the minister that they would not be able to pay salaries from January 2015. So it was a very tumultuous situation that we were getting in. So we decided that we must ask for a senior experienced person to act while we look for HSEU.
Oh, okay. All right.
But should have been around end of March.
And around end of
somewhere,
March or so,
yes.
beginning of April.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Silega.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Dr. Ngubane, that incidentally seems to coincide with what the then acting DG says in her affidavit, which I have provided you with, Ms. Matietsi Mkolo. She says in her affidavit that it was somewhere between March 2015 and April 2015 that she was again requested to accompany the minister to a meeting at Eskom. Now, the first meeting is the 11th of March meeting, where the minister went to meet with the board in that special meeting to discuss the inquiry and the stepping aside of the executives. Now, this is the second time around she's called to Eskom. And she said the meeting took place at the chairman's office at Eskom and included the acting chairperson, Mr. Ben Ngubane. Dr. Ben Ngubane, and the acting CE, Zitembe Khoza. Also, the chairperson of the Transnet board, Ms. Linda Mabazo. I was also present, she goes on to say, with Minister Brown. It must be noted that no minutes were taken during this meeting. It was just a verbal discussion pertaining to the secondment of Mr. Brian Molefe from Transnet to Eskom, which topic of discussion was introduced, and she says, by the acting chairperson, Dr. Ngubane. Let me just stop there and hear your comment on that.
Well, we're almost at the end of the process when that meeting happened. I'd written the Transnet board, they had agreed, so we were just crossing the T's and dotting the I's at that meeting. It wasn't the original start of the request. Now, of course, being chairman, because it was in my office, I introduced the subject as being the secondment of Mr. Molefe. Not that I was initiating that process.
When the PNG committee approached the minister, as you said earlier on, was that approach by way of a meeting, or was it a letter written on behalf of the committee to the minister?
We discussed the issue to request the minister. But then when I met the minister, I'm not sure whether I was with Ms. Venata Klein or with Mr. Zitembe Khoza. But we had to put this request to the minister directly.
Oh, Okay, so there was a discussion of the issue within the P&G committee first,
That's right.
right? And then the P&G committee decided that the minister should be approached.
That's correct.
And it was not the whole committee that
No.
met with the minister. It was yourself and one other member, either Mr. Zatembe Khoza or Ms. Klein.
That's correct, Chairperson.
But then on that occasion, did the two of you meet with the minister as such? On that occasion?
That's correct.
Okay, and that's where she came up with the name of Mr. Brian Molefe.
That's correct.
And you can't remember the date, but you think that meeting would have been whereabouts in terms of dates, sometime during March or sometime during April?
I think it was sometime during March. It was probably the end.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Mr. Selega?
Thank you, Chair. So, of the two meetings, Dr. Ngubane, the P&G meeting with the minister, and this meeting of the two chairpersons of the board, one of Transnet, the other of Eskom, with Mr. Zatembe Khoza, which of the two meetings came first?
Sorry?
Which of the meeting took place first?
Well, the previous meetings, as I say, the meeting in my office
Yes.
was the last meeting.
Okay, so this was the last meeting.
Yeah.
Because Ms. Mkolo goes on in her affidavit to say that Mr. Molefe was touted by the Eskom chairperson, that would be you in that meeting, as an ideal candidate for the acting CEO position, albeit on a temporary basis, while the board will be embarking on a selection and recruitment process. The proposal was supported by Transnet chairperson. Both chairpersons agreed that Mr. Molefe was a perfect technocrat. So she seems to paint a picture that the name of Mr. Brown Molefe came from your side.
No, Chairperson. As I said, that was the almost final meeting
Okay.
leading to Mr. Molefe's secondment.
Yes.
You know, we had discussed the issue of Molefe's abilities prior to this stage.
Yeah.
So I was merely introducing the subject, saying to the minister and the DG, we have agreed as the two boards to this proposal.
So you are not saying that you didn't bring up Mr. Brian Molefe's name in that meeting, but what you are saying is bringing it up did not mean that the name was coming from you. You were bringing it up because it had been brought up already.
Yes.
And you say it had been brought up by the minister much earlier. So you were just saying, here is a name that has been mentioned. Is that what you are saying?
Certainly, Chairperson, the necessary processes, like writing the letter, exchange of letters, had already taken place.
Yes. Okay. Do we by any chance have a copy of that letter in the bundle? Don't seem to have seen it.
Is it the one?
I've
to
struggled to
Transnet.
find it.
You could not find it?
I couldn't find it.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Chair. Is that, you're saying, is it your letter to the chairperson of Transnet?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
And the response from the chairperson of Transnet.
Yes,
Chair, we will check with the investigators.
yeah, okay.
So, Dr. Ngubane, this is either a coincidence or an orchestration. Because the commission has had evidence of one Mr. Henk Bester. Mr. Henk Bester. He's not from Eskom. He's an independent a person belonging to some company. He says to the commission, he testified in the Transnet work stream, and says to the commission that way back, about April 2014, when the company he was employed by was seeking to conclude a transaction with Transnet, they are called to a meeting, firstly with Mr. Anoj Singh, who is still at Transnet at the time, 2014, April 2014. Yeah. This meeting takes place at Melrose Arch. Present in that meeting is Mr. Salim Essa, who is the dominant figure, who does most of the talking. And Mr. Salim Essa is impressing on him that you will take a particular company as your supplier development partner, which is a company of Mr. Salim Essa. And this is how we will increase the figures in the contract, in the transaction. It will rise to this level. And he thinks this is ridiculous. You can't reach those figures in this transaction. I know the budget. That meeting is followed by another meeting shortly after that, where Mr. Hank Bester is called to, again, Melrose Arch, and this time around they meet at JB's Corner. You familiar with that restaurant?
Yeah.
Is that a yes, Dr. Ngubane?
Well, Chairperson, I think every Johannesburger knows JP's.
So I must be the only one who doesn't know it.
I don't know that.
Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Mkabela might know it. I don't know.
Yes, I think Mr. Mkabela knows it.
Well, I must introduce him to good company.
Yes.
In this second meeting, Mr. Anoj is not there, but Mr. Salim Essa is there, and he's pushing the same proposition to include Mr. Salim Essa's company as a supplier development partner in the transaction. And Mr. Hank Bester says, as Mr. Salim Essa is talking, he also says to him that to show you how powerful we are, he says, Mr. Salim Essa, we have already decided that the new boss of Eskom will be Brian Molefe. Now, this is way back in April 2014.
You must just double check, Mr. Selega. My recollection is that Mr. Bester said that meeting where Mr. Salim Essa said that was sometime in October 2014. So just double check. I may be mistaken, but I seem to think I particularly asked him when it would have been, obviously, because it's important to see whether it links with what happened in Eskom.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct, you will check.
But sometime in 2014, whether it was April or October, I seem to remember it as October. Mr. Salim Essa, in order to try and convince Mr. Bester that he or they, whoever they were powerful people, and therefore he must seriously consider taking his company as a supplier development partner for the job his company was going to get at Transnet. Says the next boss of Transnet is going to be Brian Molefe. And of course, if that meeting happened in October, as I think Mr. Bester says it did, 7 months later, Mr. Brian Molefe is seconded to Eskom after the Group CEO, Mr. Matona, and other executives have been suspended under certain circumstances. I think Mr. Seleka's proposition is putting to you is how come there is somebody outside of Eskom who speaks like this to a third party who has got nothing to do with Eskom in 2014, and indeed what he says is what actually happens. I'm going ahead of him now. He will tell me if that's what it's not what he was saying. I think he is saying, it just seems that this whole thing was being driven by people from outside. And Mr. Salim Essa seems to have been at the center of this. You will remember that there is evidence, say, to the effect that on the 10th of March, one day before the board was told that there was a need for the suspensions of executives, that he was meeting with Mr. Koko, and he and Mr. Koko were meeting with, or met with Ms. Daniels and met with Mr. Abram Masango, where they told them in separate meetings that there would be certain executives who would be suspended. So Mr. Seleka is saying, what do you say to somebody who says, but Mr. Brian Molefe's ultimate trip from Transnet to Eskom was long planned from outside, if this evidence by Mr. Pester is correct?
Well, this is a very, strange happening. I don't think we have got that many powerful prophets in this country.
Yeah.
When it came to the suspension of the executives, we were taken aback, and we didn't really want to go with this until the shareholder indicated that it had to be done. So I would call it a random happening, because in terms of our own actions, there was no plan. Things just developed, but there was no.
Maybe there was no plan within the board, and when I say that, I'm not saying it as a final thing. But maybe there was no plan within the board, but certain people outside of Eskom may have had a plan, and they may have had that plan way before you and the new board members got appointed to that board. If the evidence we had from Mr. Pester is true.
Yeah.
So far, nobody has challenged it, and maybe somebody will challenge it, but he was here to testify about matters at Transnet.
Okay.
And he, as far as I know, he wouldn't have known much about Eskom except what he may have read in the newspapers or in the media, heard in the media. So as he gives evidence, he comes up with this idea that, Mr. Salim Essa was pushing this idea that my company must include his company as a supply development partner in this Transnet job, and I didn't want that. Yeah. And he was telling me how he would increase the price effectively for us to get a lot of money. Yeah. And I was dismissive of this idea of his. Yeah. So as if to show me that I must take him seriously. Yeah. He's powerful. Yeah. He told me that he knows who the next boss of Eskom is going to be. It's going to be Brian Molefe. And of course, he said, Mr. Pester said, when later he got to learn that Brian Molefe was Group CEO of Eskom, then he thought about that meeting.
Well, I'm really surprised, Chairperson.
course, there are other things, Dr. Ngubane, relating to Mr. Brian Molefe. You may or may not have, you may or may not be aware that when Transnet was looking for a group CEO after Ms. Maria Ramos had resigned, it took quite a long time. She resigned, I think, at the beginning of 2009. It took quite a long time. We won't go into issues, but by end of October 2010, the position had not been filled. Ms. Barbara Hogan, who was Minister of Public Enterprises, was dismissed. Mr. Gigaba succeeded her. And in December of 2010, the Guptas launched their newspaper, The New Age. I don't know whether it was the first edition but in December, I think December, I don't know if it was December 10 or 8 or thereabout, they published a story which included a statement that Mr. Brian Molefe was going to be the new group CEO for Transnet. This was at a time when Transnet had no group CEO. I think Mr. Wells was acting. And applications had been invited, but Mr. Molefe had not applied for that position. But that's what the New Age said. And a few weeks later, I think in January, the board of Transnet, members of the board were given a chance to nominate candidates for this position. And I think Mr. Sharma nominated Mr. Brian Molefe. And I think Mr. Sharma is alleged to be a Gupta associate. He nominated Mr. Brian Molefe. And Mr. Brian Molefe ended up being Group CEO of Transnet, exactly as the New Age had said in December, even before he applied or was nominated. And then now you have a situation where Mr. Bester tells us that in 2014, Mr. Salim Essa told him that Mr. Brian Molefe was going to be the new boss of Eskom. And indeed, Mr. Brian Molefe did become the new boss of Eskom. But also, you have the meeting between Mr. Jonas and somebody from the Guptas, who I think was Tony Gupta, may have been Tony Gupta, at the Gupta residence on the 23rd of April 2015, at which, according to Mr. Jonas, he was told by the Gupta brother who was there that Mr. Brian Molefe was one of the people who were working with them, and said something like his career is well looked after, or something like that. That was in October 2023. And of course, I think there may be an argument that Mr. Molefe, went to Eskom, resigned, went to Parliament, and went back to Eskom. There seemed to be something quite special, maybe, about Eskom and him. So, but I think the main point, Dr. Ngubane, is here are some of these very strange features where somebody connected with the Guptas, whether it's the New Age or Mr. Salim Essa, seem to say what is going to happen in Mr. Brian Molefe's life and SOE's, and it happens.
Well, Chairperson, my response to this would be, if it was a mediocre person, a non-entity as it were, who is touted to be chairperson of the, or CEO of PIC, CEO of Transnet, CEO of Eskom, I would say definitely there's something amiss. However, you know, among black people, there are very, very few people with the capabilities of Brian Molefe. And this is the problem, because when you fixate on those few at the top, they seem, well, there was a saying when PE came in, that the same scoundrels were getting all the tenders and all the PE partnerships. Now, in our society, there's a very limited amount of people with real skill and capability. So it can be easy to predict someone's trajectory. I'm not saying I was exceptionally gifted, but I went to be, Mr. Mandela asked me to be Minister of Science and Technology in the first government of South Africa. KwaZulu-Natal was in trouble. Dr. Buthelezi asked me to go back to KwaZulu-Natal to be Premier for about 1.5 years. President Beki asked me back to National Ministry of Science and Technology. One night he called me to his house and he said, Ben, the Japanese have said they need an ambassador who understands technology. So I want you to go to Tokyo as ambassador. I come back from there. One morning, about 7, I get a phone call from Mr. Praveen, who was Minister Praveen, saying the cabinet has decided we are going to be chairman of SABC, and you are also going to be chairman of Land Bank. These two organizations are in trouble. We think you can help them. So I say, Praveen, I mean, he was my friend. We were together at Codesa. I say, Praveen, but this is madness. How can one person take two such organizations? You know, what I'm trying to say is, you get to a situation where the same people circulate, you know, in different organizations. So I am not, in a way, too surprised when I think about it, that a person like Brian Molefe with his capability can be touted for all sorts of positions.
Well, the strange part, I would imagine you would concede, is in regard to Transnet, a situation where that is said when there is a competitive process that is going to take place, isn't it? In other words, you might be good, but you don't know who else will apply, and one would have thought that when there's a competitive process, you wouldn't be able to say so and so will. Maybe if you already know who the other applicants are and you weigh them, that might be different. But when you don't know yet who will apply, it's strange, isn't it? To be so sure that so and so will be, unless you have some information that other people don't have.
But Chairperson, let me remind you, in our development as a new government, post-94, there's been a very strong element of deployment of the cadres. So there may be competitive elements in it, but when the elite the governing party know someone they think can fulfill their objectives, they will make sure that person gets in.
Well, one, to the extent that you have a competitive process and that is done, that might not be right because then the competition is not fair. If you talk about a position that is not subject to competition, like being a minister, that's different, you know. But if there is going to be a competitive process, it's wrong for that process to be undermined like that. But I guess you are saying, well, it happens maybe.
Well, I've been in politics, you have been in the judiciary, so
Yes.
our approaches are different.
Our wells, our wells are different. No, I won't claim to know what you know from politics. Okay, Mr. Selega.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Ngubane, we will come back to that because what I was saying to you, that it is either a coincidence or an orchestration, that what is said a year before becomes a reality a year later. Is that a coincidence or an orchestration?
Well, I think the chairperson and myself have been discussing this very
Yes.
issue. So you could call it a coincidence, but as I said, people are earmarked for troublesome sports.
Yeah.
So
It's
if
fine,
people
you
have
said it.
information, say, from the cabinet
Yes.
or from people high up in government, they could very well predict that Ngubane from here will be there.
Yeah, but that means Salim Essa then will be part of the cabinet.
Sorry?
That means Salim Essa then will be part of the cabinet or has insight into what happens
No,
in
I'm
the
just
cabinet.
giving an example.
I'm also giving an example.
Yes.
But this is a factual example. What I'm giving is a factual example because the strange part of it is that somebody outside of cabinet, outside of parliament, outside of SOEs,
Right.
outside of your meetings with the minister, has said a year before, prophetically, that we have decided that Mr. Brown Molefe will be the chairperson. So that's what is strange about it. If you and I are earmarked for a job by Leslie Mkabela, that's fine.
Right.
But if the minister's advisor, as he introduced himself, Mr. Salim Essa to Suzanne Daniels, is saying these things when he is not a de jure legal advisor to the minister, then it's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with here.
No, certainly that's wrong, Chairperson.
The chairperson, just quickly on the transcript of Mr. Bester, before the commission here, when asked questions by my colleague Seagulls Ngube, and who did he say that person would be? Let me first read Mr. Bester's response. He did not go into the detail, but he said to me, I must not worry about the detail or budget. I recall, for instance, he told me that they had already decided who's going to be the next CEO of Eskom. And I will clearly see it when it happens, that what the power is that they have and how they make decisions if I do not believe him. Then he's asked by my colleague, and who did he say that person would be? Mr. Bester responds, he said they decided Mr. Brown Molefe will be the CEO of Eskom. And my colleague asked, and this was all during that meeting? And the response is, that is correct. Okay, now this, then the chairperson, you come in. I'm sorry. This would have been after April 2014, you said. Did you say this meeting would have taken place after April 2014, Mr. Bester? And he says, that is correct, yes. So that chair would then have been after April.
I just check, I think I may have asked how long after April 2014.
Yes, yes. But then it's still in
But we
2014.
we can check, you don't need to check everything for purposes of Dr. Ngubane's evidence.
Yes.
It's
It's
actually
neither here
for any purpose, it doesn't matter whether it was April or October.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
So Dr. Ngubane, then, here comes Mr. Brown Molefe. The announcement is made on the 17th of April. And you mentioned the minister said she met with the president and so on. She later had to correct that. And that she,
Sorry, Chair, I've got a bit of sinusitis. My ears are blocked.
oh,
Oh,
I-
yeah, yeah, please raise your
I
voice.
was driving up here from KZN.
Oh, yes. Please raise your voice, Mr. Silega.
yes. So the minister makes the announcement on the 17th of April 2015 regarding the appointment of Mr. Molefe. And as you mentioned, she had said in that meeting that she had met with the relevant stakeholders, being the president and the deputy president, but she also included the boards of Transnet and Eskom, a statement which she later had to correct, because by the time she made the announcement, she had not met with the two boards. She had only met with you and Miss Linda Mabaso.
We were representing the two ports.
Yes. But she did correct that she didn't meet with the board, she met with the two chairpersons.
That's right.
Yes. So you go into the meeting of the 23 of April 2015, the board meeting of the 23rd of April 2015. At least you as the chairperson, acting chairperson of the board, with the knowledge that Mr. Molefe is coming. He's been seconded to Eskom. Well, maybe more than you, because the announcement was publicly made. So the entire board would know this. Correct?
Well, I think the secondment of Mr. Molefe became public knowledge immediately.
Yes. So the board goes into this meeting knowing he's coming, because it is in the meeting of the 23rd that the board approves Mr. Molefe's secondment.
Right.
Yeah. So the resolution is the secondment of Mr. Brown Molefe from Transnet as interim chief executive for Eskom is approved with effect from 20 April 2015.
Okay.
So that's the approval. The chairman of the board is authorized to sign any and all agreements and documents to give effect to the above resolution, and the chairperson of the board is reflected as you, in fact, acting chairperson at the time. Then comes this issue of optimum, which is the focus of our attention. The issue of optimum, I suppose the board would have known this. It comes way back from 2014, before the board is appointed.
Comes back from 2012.
Even way back from 2012. But when optimum goes into hardship, when its export market plummets, the export market which it used to subsidize its sale to Eskom plummets, optimum falls into difficulties because it cannot sustain the price at which it was selling coal to Eskom. The price is way below its operational costs. Then it goes into hardship. This happens. It triggers negotiations in 2014, before your time.
Sorry. Can I, before you get even more complicated?
Okay.
The issue with Glencore Optimum,
Yes.
from what I've read or what I've heard, there was a period when the export coal price was rocketing in dollars, and every coal producer was trying to get into the international market. That time, Optimum Coal Mine was washing its coal, taking out the best for export and giving rubbish to Eskom. Even that rubbish was below the coal supply agreement stipulated. And that's where the issue of penalties started coming in. So they are misrepresenting the issue that their hardship started when the export coal price collapsed. That benefited billions at the expense of Eskom while the coal price was up there. So really it's pathetic that big organizations like this, wealthy as they are, have totally abused us in South Africa to scream off all the wealth and take it overseas to their shareholders. I think this was a very well felt sensitivity in Eskom, that Glencore and their subsidiaries were just interested in profit. Whether Eskom boilers burst or suffered damage because of the poor coal quality that was being burnt, they didn't care. And hence the hardening of attitudes. And when Mr. Molefe told us later that Mr. Glassenberg had said to him, from here, because you are stiff-headed, I'm going to stop supplying Enrina, and this load shedding will then become a national blackout. We all felt it, because it was real arrogance coming from a man from Switzerland, coming to tell us how he wants us to bow to his demands, to treble the price of coal from 150 to 513 rands per ton overnight. So I would beg this commission to take some of this evidence with circumspection. Thank you, sir.
No, it's very important, Dr. Ngubane, that you and Brian Molefe and whoever else was at Eskom at the time and was involved in these discussions give us your full perspectives, how you saw matters, so that we have all perspectives. So we want to hear your full perspectives, exactly what caused Eskom to make certain decisions, what caused Eskom to adopt a certain attitude. So it's very important.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Dr. Ngubane, it's apparent to me that you are familiar with the issues. So let's free flow into them.
Well, I'm not familiar with all the issues, but I'm talking about...
Yeah, no, I will assist with reference to documents where we need to.
Okay.
So then, this matter of OCM, which is Optimum Coal Mine, the evidence was laid yesterday, comes from and I want to limit it to 2014, where there's a cooperation agreement between OCM and Eskom. There is a fourth addendum, which is proposed in terms of the prices increases to the supply of coal to Eskom. And the intention is, as we understand it, all that negotiation process, the cooperation, is done in order to achieve a new agreement on the 1st of January 2015. I don't know whether you are aware of that. There is, it rings, you can recall.
Sure.
Just confirm it so that the chairperson can hear you.
So I do record.
Yeah. So it's just the broad outlines, because what is referred to as ex-COPS, the Executive Procurement Committee had agreed on the addendum. They then referred it to the BTC for approval. It comes to the BTC in the meeting of 13 or 15 April. The BTC doesn't decide that matter. It refers it to the board. Then it comes to the board on the 23rd of April. When it comes to the board also doesn't decide it. The board decides instead to refer it to the new acting CEO. And maybe you could give the chairperson some insight into why did the board make that decision to refer this matter that comes way back from at least 2014 to a man who is completely new, and he would be, about a week at Eskom, and if you are seconding him effective from the 20th of April, I don't know when does he start. You are making your decision 3 days about referring this matter to him. Yeah, give the chairperson some insight into that decision.
Well, Chairperson, I wish I had a video of Brian Molefe going to the most troubled power stations. He comes in there, the staff is gathered, there's an open space, he jumps in there and starts jiving and singing. That was the man. And then 1, 2, 3, all station masters are under pressure to produce because their own people are demanding efficiency, productivity. That's how we overcame load shedding. So the fact that he was new, the fact that the BTC was refusing to accept a proposal from Eskom, which is the Eskom Procurement Subcommittee, on an increase in price, which again I think was about threefold. They said they can't deal with this, they will not accept it, they're bringing it to us. And also we, of course, couldn't deal with this because this was a matter of negotiation. But we all said, let's leave it for the CEO. But knowing Brian, he came in here, boots and all, and started dealing with it. And we were quite happy with the way he dealt with it, because he was stopping exploitation of the people of this country.
Yes. Of course, by the time you make the decision, he had not gone to a power station, climbed on a platform to dance and jive.
Sure.
You didn't know anything and how he would turn around the situation. But anyway, you have accelerated it. You say you were happy with the way he handled it.
Yeah.
Because what he did is, a year after the cooperation agreement had been concluded, it's concluded in May 2014, the parties have entered into an agreement that they will negotiate. In May of 2015, he terminates negotiations process. He terminates the cooperation agreement, and he he demands the payment of the penalties, the 2.17 billion rand penalties, which you have referred to.
Sure.
And you're saying the board was happy with the way he handled it. Yeah. Now, talking of the penalties, do you know how the penalty issue was handled?
Sorry?
Do you know how the penalty issue was handled?
Oh, yeah. Well, not fully,
Okay.
but in terms of what I know, this penalty issue originated from 2012. By the time we came in as a board, some parts of it, because it was happening at different stages, accumulating penalties for this period and so on. By the time we came in, some parts of it, a big part of it was going to, in law they call it prescribe. And from what Brian reported, he had no choice but to make sure that he doesn't allow prescription. He doesn't allow OCM and Glencoe to get away with murder. And that was the approach that was taken, that we won't take your sad story of hardship when we are so wealthy. You tell us hardship, you tell us Glencoe from Switzerland is refusing to give you money every month to run the show. I mean, that was all false. You know, they could use their reserves to support Optimum. Optimum went into business rescue purely to avoid the issue of paying the penalty. And even when arbitration was suggested, they refused it. So they mustn't come here, Chairperson, and be holy and nice. They are bad. I would call them crooks, like many other international corporations. When they come into Africa, they think we're there for the taking. Stupid Africans for the taking. No, sir.
Yes.
So, remembering the evidence that was given last year about these issues, one of the matters that was strange to me was this, that I think OCM's complaint was that the price for coal that they were bound to in terms of their agreement with Eskom was a price that had been there for ages. It had not been revised. But of course, the question would be, but how did you sign an agreement that tied you to the same price for ages without putting in a clause that would ensure that it increased according to the inflation or whatever, or that made room for annual negotiations to take place to revise the price? But so there was that particular aspect to say, when they say, look, this price that Eskom is enforcing is an old price. All we are asking is that let's talk and revise it, and they are refusing. Of course, to the extent that Eskom may have been refusing, it would have been using its contractual rights. But the question also from their side, OCM side, would be, but how did you allow whoever signed on your behalf, signed this contract, to sign a contract that the price would be the same for 10 years or more? Were they sleeping or what? How could you have signed such a contract? Nobody signed such a contract. So there was that aspect. Of course, it did come across, I can say, as maybe a little harsh on Eskom's side when they, I think it was Mr. Brian Molefe said, we are not negotiating. Go according to the contract. Go according to the contract. But that may have been contractually permissible, but it's important that we get the full perspective from Eskom's side, because you have now said, for example, they took the cream of the coal and sent it overseas and gave you coal that was below standard, and that is why the penalties came in. So it's important to have all of that in the basket.
Well, on that note, Chairperson, Glencore came in fairly late into mining in South Africa, Witbank. They bought a lot of mining assets. I think at one stage they had about 14 in the coal basin area of Witbank. They bought companies that had been corruptly given very long contracts in the apartheid era. So what they were talking about itself was corruption in its own right. Now they come in because they realize that, it's not giving them as much returns. They want suddenly to up it. They don't want to pay the penalties. No, sir. Pembani wanted to buy OCM. I mean, there were 3 bidders for OCM. One of them was Pembani, the other one was Tegeta. I forget the third one. Pembani came to Eskom to say, raise the price, then we'll buy OCM. Eskom said, no, it will not be done. So it wasn't just to OCM that Eskom was hard. It was hard even to the other people who wanted to buy OCM. Eskom was insisting that unless you stick to the established coal supply agreement, we are not interested in you.
I suspect there is going to be a time when Mr. Selega will say, but was it hard on Tegeta? But let me leave
That's
that
exactly the next question.
Before you say it, sir,
Okay.
Tegeta offered to pay 150 rands per ton after taking optimum. So,
Well, there are other matters, Dr. Ngubane. Let's
Yeah,
take the tea
tea.
break.
Thank you.
Let's take the tea break, and Mr. Selega will raise other matters as well.
Indeed.
It's 22 minutes past. We will resume at 22:12.
Thank
We
you.
adjourn.
Thank you.
All rise.
Is what?
Okay, let's continue.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Ngubane, there's the issue of penalties and the issue of exploitation you referred to just before the adjournment. I'll come to the penalties in a moment. But let's deal with the exploitation that you mentioned. Surely, I gather from your testimony that you didn't want to deal with Glencore anymore. I mean, I'll be the last person myself to support the exploitation of a foreign company. The exploitation of a local company by a foreign company. I'll be the last person to do that. I wouldn't encourage that situation. And so you're saying that to the chairperson as well. That this is what you didn't want as Eskom, the exploitation of Glencore by OC, the exploitation of Eskom by Glencore or OCM. Right?
Chairperson, unfortunately, issues arise here that force one to make certain observations. The cost of electricity at one stage was very low, the lowest in the world. That's why we got smelters like Alusaf, steel and so on, and a very strong mining sector because our energy costs were low. But when it came to the coal plus mines, which were the main suppliers to Eskom power stations, reducing their production as a way of forcing Eskom to give them higher rates, then the cost of producing energy escalated. And then the electricity tariff started going up like it is today. We applied for a 16% increase in tariff in 2015. NESA gave us only 8%. We employed McKinsey to do DTC2, which is designed to cost 2. Before that, we had business productivity program, which was aimed mainly at cost saving, reducing costs. DTC2 was aimed at finding a new tariff trajectory, which will not require taxation of people in buying electricity to rise too high, but for Eskom to develop alternative ways of raising revenue. One of the programs we had with the University of Stellenbosch and the University of Johannesburg was to produce our own rooftop panels for solar energy, very advanced. The first factory was going to be built in Soweto, and then other factories will be built elsewhere. The water heating solar energy was going to be provided to every home in an attempt to ensure equitable access to energy for everyone by keeping the tariff low. But what's happened now? We are seeing an escalation in tariff. Eskom is not even making the same revenues that we used to make because they're paying IPPs lots and lots of money for very small amounts of megawatts of electricity. They are burning diesel at probably 1 billion rand a month because the IPPs can't produce enough wattage or megawatts, of electricity. So, as was the case with baseload when we had coal-fired power stations. So what I'm getting to is, we had a vision for electricity accessibility in this country to benefit everybody. They've decided to close down the coal-fired power stations in favor of IPPs. Okay, we're all concerned about climate change, but we're a developing country. You can't expect a poor person to pay the very high tariffs that renewable energy will demand. You can't. In other words, we're going to cut off from electrical supply and power a huge percentage of the South African population, 75% probably, because people are unemployed, there is no money, it's only the wealthy who are going to afford electricity in the future with these high tariffs. So I'm getting back to the point that you must look at the philosophy that we pursued and look at the present charges and claims against us. As Koko said, history will absolve us because we cannot have growing industrialization under the present regime in terms of electricity management and cost. So I just wanted to make that remark before we continue.
You undertook to me that you wouldn't be long-winded.
Sorry?
I said you undertook to me that you wouldn't be long-winded in your answers.
Albi?
You wouldn't be long-winded in your answers.
Oh, no, I'll be short. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, all right.
Yes. So I was saying, Dr. Ngubane, that clearly from what you were explaining before the adjournment, you didn't want to continue dealing with the situation where you were being exploited by Optimum as Eskom. From your explanation before the adjournment.
Yes.
Yes. Well, you're taking too long to think about it. But if your decision on the 10th of December was opposite to that sentiment, I'm going to blame you and your board.
The 10th of
Decision
December
on
decision.
10th of December, which decision on the 10th? Which one is that?
The prepayment decision.
Oh. Prepayment,
Yes.
as far as I'm concerned, has been taken totally out of context.
Yeah.
If you read the motivation, you know, Ms. Daniels came to my office in the afternoon, just before I was going home, and said, there's an emergency now. We need to deal this as an emergency, and an emergency in Eskom is 24 hours. Within 24 hours, we must have a resolution passed by the board. I said, for what? She showed me the papers, 1.68 billion rand prepayment for coal to Optimum. I said, IFC will have to deal with this first. He said, no, they've already taken a resolution.
Oh, so when is he meeting with you?
Sorry?
When is this, her coming to your office? That would be on the 9th.
Before we put the round robin to the board members, she came to the office with the documents.
On the same day?
On the same day,
Okay,
Yes.
I had to approve that she starts the round robin.
okay.
Yes.
But the condition for any emergency is that the most senior officer on site must approve. All right?
Yes, but you, sorry, you say she also said to you, IFC has already dealt with
Yes,
this.
yes. So on that, in fact, I think I said that in my affidavit. All right, and then she explained, we read the documents, there was an emergency, the putting of OCM into business rescue has created an emergency. Anything can happen. If they go to liquidation, we might lose all our coal, we might lose, the workers may lose their jobs. DMR has commented on this. It's the best approach is to pre-purchase the coal. So I read the documents and I said, well, that's fine, then put it onto a round robin. The terms of this resolution centered on the fact that if we pre-purchase the coal, we lock in the coal supply for Eskom for a year, 5.5 million tons of coal. So whoever purchases, or if it's liquidated, whoever purchases OCM, we have locked in our supply of coal. They cannot take the coal and walk away with it, say export it or do anything. They will still have to supply our coal. That essentially was the logic of the pre-purchase.
So your decision was to buy directly from OCM.
Yes.
And
So in other words, you would say to OCM, you would determine how much coal you needed as Eskom for a year,
That's correct.
and say to OCM, we are paying you in advance
That's right.
for coal that will last us for a year.
That's correct.
Therefore, if this succeeds, it means Eskom would be guaranteed of coal for at least a year.
That's correct.
That would give you or Eskom an opportunity to see how to handle the situation beyond 12 months.
That's correct.
Okay, Mr. Sileka?
so OCM obviously had coal available.
Yes.
Yes. Did you prepay them?
OCM was in business rescue, but they were going to come out of business rescue for the purpose of this transaction.
Yes, but did you prepay them?
Sorry?
Did you prepay them?
We would prepay them, but the conditions were very clear. The funding will not be a lump sum. It will come in stages. We reduce the inventory of our stockpile from 54 days to 40 days. Now, the inventory working capital reduction is a universally applied methodology. Because when we reduce inventory, that is the stockpile in our case, R1 of reduction in inventory results in R1 addition into operating cash.
But before you go into those details, Dr. Ngubane, the prepayment was never made to OCM.
The prepayment was for coal.
Yeah, but it was never made.
No, well, I mean, I'm talking about how we approach the resolution.
Yes, but my question was the prepayment made to OCM?
Well, it was going to be made over time. It wasn't going to be a lump sum payment. I mean, it's like what Toyota would call just on time. Just on time. You know, you empty your bin of spare parts, and then the computer sends the message to the supplier of the parts, they deliver the parts. It was that same sort of approach.
Yes, but let's clarify it because it needs to be clarified. You said it has been taken out of context and we need to contextualize it.
Yeah.
One is that if your prepayment was meant to go to OCM,
Yes.
owned by Glencoe, it goes contrary to the sentiment expressed by you so strenuously before the adjournment that you didn't want to be exploited. You took a decision that goes contrary to that sentiment, contrary to the actions of Mr. Molefe, which you supported, terminating the agreement with cooperation agreement with OCM, terminating negotiations. That's the one aspect. It goes contrary to all that.
No. The issue with OCM was wanting 513 rands per ton instead of 150. We were going to buy it at the coal supply agreement price.
By the way, the correct amount is 432 per ton.
All right.
432 per ton.
All right.
The second point is this.
Sorry, I hadn't finished.
Okay.
So it wasn't part of the settlement negotiations with a second addendum or anything like that. It was simply purchasing coal for a year because we needed the coal. Without that coal, Henrina Power Station would go out of service. Komati Power Station would go out of service. So it was a critical issue that we had a supply of coal for a year. As chairperson said, while we make other arrangements. So I don't see where now I'm contradicting myself. Sorry, you know.
Yes, no, that's all right. The second point is this, and I want to read it from the submission itself. which is on page 281 of Eskom Bundle 18, Chairperson.
Okay. Yes.
Page 281.
Do you recall, Dr. Ngubane, whose idea this prepayment was? I know that you said Ms. Daniels came to you with the paperwork or the submission, I'm not sure. But did you get to know whether it was her idea or whether it was somebody else's idea?
No, Mr. Koko Machela had signed
Yes.
the document.
Okay.
Yes.
So you took it to be Mr. Koko's idea?
Yeah. Also, there was also a letter from DMR,
Yes.
which was also suggesting the same,
The same
approach.
thing. Okay, okay. Yes, Mr. Slager.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just piggyback on the Chairperson's questions? Because according to Ms. Daniels, I will not lose focus of that point. According to Ms. Daniels, you were the one who called her on or about the 7th of December. So,
Sorry, I phoned her.
yeah, she says in her affidavit, you were the one who telephoned her on or about the 7th of December 2015. You said to her, Suzanne, please assist Mr. Koko, the two executives, Mr. Koko and Mr. Anot Singh, in drafting a submission that would be submitted to the board. She then set about to do that, get the information from the two executives in order to put together this document I'm about to refer you to. The document is then circulated to the board members on the 8th of December. Today, 5 years ago, but much later in the day, in the evening, is circulated to the board members for a resolution by round robin. That's how she tells the evidence. Can you recall whether you called her?
Well, I'm thoroughly disappointed with Ms. Daniels. You know, I relied on this lady for everything at Eskom. She was highly knowledgeable. I never initiated anything with, I didn't even know about this project until she brought the documentation to me, you know. So,
Yeah.
I don't know why she should try. What is she trying to do? I mean, I was hardly involved in primary energy issues, which is coal, diesel.
Yeah. But just understand her evidence is that you called to say assist the two executives.
No,
Okay.
no.
Let me go to the point I wanted to make with you, Dr. Ngubane. Then we're on page 281. Page 281, paragraph 2.1.
Just so that the record will be clear, that's page 281 of Eskom Bundle 18.
18, correct,
Yeah.
Chairperson. Thank you,
Okay.
Chair. You see that, Dr. Ngubane. Paragraph 2 says, resolution required. Then it says, it is hereby resolved that the request from the Department of Mineral Resources is hereby noted. Now, you know that request is the letter you're talking about. Dr. Ngubane.
Yes,
The request is that letter from the DMR you were talking about.
okay.
Then you have paragraph 2.1.2. The group chief executive, together with the group executive for generation and chief financial officer, are hereby authorized to negotiate and conclude a pre-purchase of coal agreement with the proposed owners of OCM, bracket coal supplier. Now, the proposed owners was Tegeta.
At that stage, no, I don't think Tegeta was owning OCM at this stage.
No, the proposed owner.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
All
Was
right.
Tegeta.
Yeah.
Now explain this paragraph then, or statement, because that's the required resolution. You say the pre-purchase of coal was to buy it from OCM
Yes.
directly.
Well, they still owned the mine. I mean, the mine was in business rescue, owned by Glencore.
That's right.
It hadn't changed hands.
That's right.
Had it changed hands?
No, it hadn't.
The,
had not.
the point that Mr. Selega is making, Mr. Dr. Ngubane, is this. He says, in terms of the evidence that you have already given, the prepayment, according to you, was to be an arrangement or agreement between Eskom and OCM in order to secure coal for 12 months.
That's right.
But he says when you look at this clause here, it authorizes the group chief executive, the group executive for generation, and the chief financial officer not to negotiate with OCM for this deal to be made for a prepayment, but it authorizes them to negotiate with people who are not owning the mine, who are proposed owners.
Right.
So he is saying, are you able to explain why the resolution said these three are authorized or were authorized to negotiate not with OCM or with the rescue practitioners, but with people who didn't own the mine at the time, but were proposed owners? So that's what he would like you to deal with.
Thank you for clarifying, Chairperson.
Yes, yes.
I think this comes from the fact that OCM had already stated that they were selling the mine. They were taking OCM out of business rescue under Glencoe. Eskom, I think I saw a letter to that effect. And also that two other bidders had fallen away, and Tageta was the only one remaining. But what I was not understanding was whether in fact he meant that we already knew that Tageta had bought the mine. I don't think so. But we knew that it was in the process of being bought, you know.
Yes, so the statement here in the resolution, which was sought from the board, appears on the face of it to be inconsistent with the explanation that, in your understanding as the board, you were dealing here directly with OCM in regard to the prepayment.
Well, this, as I said, the whole thing is very complex. But in my understanding, the coal would come from OCM, which was still running the mine. Even the one who bought it would be bound by that sale, that payment. And so the coal will essentially have been ceded to Eskom even before the sale. That was in that context I was saying.
Well,
I wasn't saying the money will be taken to the potential buyer, in my understanding.
Yes, the money will go to the supplier.
Yes.
Yes.
But even when it's sold, we will be sure of coal.
well, I would have expected that the negotiations would be with the owners, the then owners of the mine, or those who represented the owners, maybe business rescue practitioners if they were in place at the time, precisely on the basis that you give, that if such an agreement was concluded
Yes.
with the current owners or their representatives, that agreement would bind those who bought the mine, if it was sold. So if that approach is correct, then it's difficult to understand why the board would authorize these three officials, Group CEO, Group Chief Financial Officer, and Group Executive for Generation, to negotiate with people who are proposing to buy the mine, and not just negotiate, conclude a deal with them, instead of the board saying, negotiate and conclude a deal with the current owners of the mine, because these proposed owners don't own the mine yet. So why should you negotiate with them and conclude a deal with them? You see, I think that's where there are question marks. You understand?
I do, Chairperson.
Mr. Selega.
Yeah. And then the urgency of the matter, Dr. Ngubane. Because you see the DMR's letter is put together on the 4th of December 2015. It is signed by Mr. Koko on the 6th, 2 days later, of December 2016. He sends it to the DMR. He's asking for the DMR's assistance. The type of assistance is not spelled out. There's a response from the DMR, which is undated, but signed by Dr. Ramoncha. So we don't know when exactly do you receive it. But apparently it was part of the package that went to the board. In that response letter, mention is made of the 1.7 billion liability that OCM might still have. It's not clear what is this. Until you read the affidavit of Dr. Ramoncha, which he says, he explains it by reference to rehabilitation, environmental rehabilitation fund. Mention is made of a prepayment, and Eskom should actively assist in that. That is the letter from DMR. Your meeting, it's not even a meeting, I beg your pardon, the round robin, that pack is circulated to the board. But before that, we have gone through the draft of the submission yesterday. The draft is a submission to IFC, Investment Finance Committee. Were you aware of that?
Well, I was aware in the sense that Mr. Daniels told me that IFC had actually taken a decision on the emergency supply.
Yeah, well, this is how, from the documentation, the evidence unfolds. The draft is prepared before it's circulated on the 8th of December, today, 5 years ago. And it goes out of Eskom.
Right.
It goes to Mr. Eric Wood and Mr. Hauer and businessmen. Businessman writes an email. He says he doesn't want. There's a requirement for PFMA approval. He doesn't want that. And number two, he says this thing should not go to IFC, should go directly to the board. Were you aware of that?
No, not at all.
And that's how this document changes from a submission to IFC to a submission to the board.
But that can't be, Chairperson. In an emergency, either BTC can decide, or if not, IFC can decide on amounts like this. So, without a recommendation from either BTC or IFC, this board round robin cannot happen.
That's important, Dr. Ngubane, because here it happened. And let me tell you how it happened.
Well, then there's something very wrong.
That's right. Yes, I'll give you the facts. So it gets changed. We went through the evidence yesterday.
Yeah.
From IFC, submission to IFC, it is a submission to the board. On the 8th, in the evening of the 8th, it is circulated to the board members to be decided upon by way of a round robin.
Right.
It was only when one of the board members approving the...
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Sele.
Yes, Chair.
Actually, I do remember now yesterday that it was businessmen who said the resolution the matter should not go to the Investment and Finance Committee.
Correct, Chair.
It should go straight to the board.
Correct.
Yeah, there is an email along those lines. I think Mr. Slega might read it to you
I see.
from businessmen. I think to Mr. Gogo and from Mr. Gogo to Ms. Daniels, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I wasn't aware, Chairperson, of the background.
Yes, yes, yeah. No, it's one of those things that are strange, because I said to Ms. Daniels, it looks again like somebody from outside Eskom is giving instructions to people inside Eskom. When people inside Eskom think this matter should go to the Finance and Investment Committee, he or she, whoever he or she is, says, no, you people, take this to the board, not to the Finance and Investment Committee. And then that is what happens.
Yeah.
You know, they obey.
And businessman is not the DG.
And the businessman is not the DG.
That email...
And he says, you know, in this submission, I don't want this PFMA
Yes.
thing. Take it out.
The page reference, Chairperson, is 453.
In the bundle 18.
Eskom bundle 18.
Okay, Assistant Dr. Ngubane to have, so that he can see what we are talking about.
Yes.
What's the page?
Page 453.
453.
Yes.
So you can see what was happening at Eskom while he was acting chairperson or chairperson.
Yeah. He was the chairperson at this
Yeah,
time.
he was the chairperson.
Fully fledged.
But this suggestion is totally invalid.
Indeed.
You know.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it might not be a suggestion, Dr. Ngubane. You see the language there. I want the PFMA approval part removed.
Yeah.
It's not I'm suggesting.
But then the person doesn't understand actually how the Public Finance Management Act works.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't care about
Yeah,
that.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, maybe he doesn't care about that. Maybe his attitude is, you people don't tell me about PFMA, no, and don't tell me about the investment committee. This thing must go to the full board. He says, I also think it should be full board, not IFC.
Well,
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Selega.
Thank you, Chair. So then, Dr. Ngubane, so that's the evolution of this document. It changes and changes, and ultimately it goes to the board. This email is on the 7th of December.
Right.
The board receives the pack on the 8th of December, according to the evidence laid yesterday, for a round robin. So the board hasn't received a notice for a meeting,
Right.
correct?
You're right.
There's no agenda circulated 3
Well-
weeks beforehand or 2 weeks beforehand.
But Chairperson, that's the nature of an emergency. Those processes are suspended.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I think that's a fair point.
I
Yes.
think 32.3210 34 of procurement procedure describes the emergency procurement
Yeah.
quite clearly.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point.
Yes. No, let me write that emergency down in big letters. And I'll come to it. So the board then, in the email from Ms. Daniels, is asked to decide on this by 12 midday on the 9th of December. I don't know whether you recall that. We can find the email to you from Ms. Daniels.
Well, we don't need to, Chairperson, because
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
it would follow. That's an emergency.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Then Ms. Viroshni Naidu, on the same evening, I think after 9, she says, I approve, and mentions points there, one of which is the matter should go to IFC. That's the evening of the 8th. And Ms. Daniel says she acted on that to call an IFC in the morning of the 9th of December. And IFC started at 9 o'clock. Meeting of IFC started at 9 o'clock. Do you know that?
No, I don't know that, because that actually invalidates that round robin completely,
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, because
you know.
you gave your approval to the submission
Yes.
at 8:34 on the 9th of December, before IFC had its meeting.
Yeah.
Well, need I go any further there? So this round robin is invalidated,
Yeah,
you say.
absolutely.
Yeah. So the emergency, can I come to the emergency issue? What was the emergency here?
Well, if by putting Optimum Coal Mining into business rescue, you were actually saying that it can't trade anymore. So if it wasn't trading, there will be no coal supply to Andrina and Komati power stations. That was the essence of the emergency.
Yeah. So that's how you understood it, or that's how it was put to you?
Essentially, when she went with me, through this document with me, that was the understanding.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you're not a lawyer, but the business rescue practitioners, when they take over as business rescue,
Yes.
as the word says, rescue, business rescue, they're trying to rescue that business. The business will trade. That's why Tegeta is able to come and be the middleman between you and OCM. They get coal from OCM and supply to Eskom. Because that business can still trade. It's trying to come out of the difficulties it finds itself in, to be rescued. But you understand it.
Yeah, but it's contrary to what I thought business rescue was about.
Yeah, because it's not liquidation.
Okay,
They are not being liquidated.
sure. All right.
The business rescue comes with a plan how to rescue this business. And they will
You are
run-
being helped to survive.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
You are being helped to survive.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you know what happened to your decision for prepayment, Dr. Ngubane? But by now you know. By then, I don't know whether did you know. It
No.
gets converted into a guarantee.
No, that
Yeah, explain
is
it
a
to
mystery.
us. It's a mystery.
Yeah, because that's not what the resolution was saying.
That's right. So how did that happen? Because it happened the next day, on the 10th of December.
Well, again, you see, I can't believe that Ms. Daniel failed to inform the board, well, at least me as chairperson, about this development.
But what do you say about the executives who converted it? Because she didn't sign the guarantee, somebody else signed it.
No, I'm just talking in terms of this has happened.
Yes.
Because she's the custodian of governance
I see.
in the company.
Yeah, so she never told you.
No, never did. I only learned about this somewhere in April as I was about to leave Eskom. You know, it came through the media. Otherwise, there was never a submission to say, this person signed an illegal order or whatever. You know.
And you know that the guarantee was in favor of Tegeta and not OCM.
Well, that's what I learned.
So completely the antithesis to
No, absolutely.
the resolution.
It undermines this whole thing.
Yes.
It raises the question, Dr. Ngubane, which I kind of said last time when you were here, the commission has to look at. We have to remain open-minded about various issues and conclude when all the evidence is in.
Right.
But I said, in effect, one can't close one's eyes to a certain line of thinking.
Right.
And it's important to put it to people who were involved so that one hears what they have to say about it. It raises the question of whether there were people outside of Eskom who may have been manipulating Eskom processes for their own agendas. And that includes the issue of the suspension of the executives. So it raises that question, whether there were people outside of Eskom who were manipulating Eskom processes in order to achieve or pursue their own goals. In regard to this, we have just referred to the fact that here is businessmen sending an email saying, take out the PFMA approval. I don't want it. I want it removed. Don't send this thing to the IFC. It must go to the full board. We have just told you about Mr. Hank Bester's evidence that already in 2014, he says he was told by Mr. Salim Essa, the next boss of Eskom is Mr. Brian Molefe. And then, of course, you have the Transnet things. But with regard to Eskom, you then have the evidence of Abraham Masango and Ms. Daniels, which says, before the board could know about this idea of suspensions, because the board only got to know about that from the evidence that I have heard on the morning of the 11th or on the 11th of March. But before the board could discuss this, already on the 10th of March, the day before, if Ms. Daniel's evidence is correct and if Ms. Masango's evidence is correct, Mr. Salim Essa knew about it and knew the names of the executives who would be suspended. And of course, Mr. Koko, according to their evidence, and if their evidence is correct, Mr. Koko denies that such as those meetings happened. But if I evaluate the evidence at the end, and if I ultimately find that indeed those meetings did take place, which involved Mr. Salim Essa and Mr. Koko on the 10th of March, and that what was said included that the 4 executives would be suspended. According to Mr. Masango, he goes further, he says, Mr. Koko said that although he would be one of the executives to be suspended, ultimately he would come back after the suspension, but the other 3 would not come back. That's what Mr. Masango says. Of course, as I said, Mr. Koko denies that. But if it was true, if it were to be true that that meeting did take place and that's what was discussed, then it would be difficult not to seriously consider whether there wasn't one or more people outside of Eskom who were manipulating either processes within Eskom or even manipulating some people within Eskom for their own purposes. And it is important that all of us look at these issues and give our own input, because if it did happen, it's not something that should happen, that should have happened.
Agree, Chairperson.
Yeah. Mr. Seleka?
So, Dr. Ngubane, it would seem that these executives were on a frolic of their own.
That was?
That these executives were on a frolic of their own.
Well, quite clearly.
From this information here.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, I don't know whether you are aware, when Mr. Anuj Singh was at the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, he explains the rationale for the guarantee when asked about it in this way. He says he issued that guarantee because Eskom could not obtain coal immediately from Tegeta. The agreement, the underlying agreement, that agreement was concluded between Eskom and Tegeta for the supply of coal, to which your resolution relates, the pre-purchase of coal. It was not concluded with OCM. It was concluded as per that paragraph 2.1.
But there's no mention of Tegeta.
Yes, but the agreement was concluded with Tegeta.
All right.
Of course, the resolution didn't say they must negotiate and conclude a deal with OCM.
Yes.
The resolution of the board said they should negotiate and conclude a deal with the proposed owners of OCM, which they identified as Tegeta.
And
Well, Chairperson, just to, devil's advocate.
Yes.
Obviously, once the buyer takes over, there would have to be negotiations about the coal supply agreement and the pricing and so on. So negotiating with the new owner is inevitable because there will obviously be regulatory issues that need to be ironed out. I'm just trying to look at...
No, I understand. But based on the idea of an emergency, the emergency, if there was one,
Yes.
dictated that the deal that needed to be concluded was with OCM.
That's correct.
If there were to be any negotiations with the proposed buyers or owners, that could come later.
That's true.
That was not urgent. What was urgent was a deal with OCM.
Correct.
And of course, if the position was that if Eskom negotiated with ACM and concluded a deal, that deal would be binding on the buyers, there would be no need for other negotiations with the buyers. But if it was not going to be binding on the buyers, then there may have been a need for negotiations. You understand?
I do.
Yes, okay.
thank you, Chair. So the agreement, now we are on the 10th of December.
Okay.
That agreement with Tegeta is concluded on the very day, the 10th of December. But it has suspensive conditions.
You buy coal.
Yeah, pre-purchase of coal.
Okay.
It's on page 719 of this bundle, Eskom bundle 18.
719.
719.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
And it is signed by Mr. Anuj Singh on behalf of Eskom on page 722. You see it on 719? Agreement regarding the pre-purchase of coal from, it says optimum coal.
Yeah,
You see
I
that?
see that.
But see who signs on page 722. Page 722.
Yes.
For Tigeta Exploration and Resources, 10 December 2015. Ravindra Nath. And Mr. Singh at the top. There's two things. I can go quickly to the one aspect. So this agreement is then subject to suspensive conditions. And Mr. Singh says to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, I did this, a guarantee, because Eskom could not, in terms of this agreement, obtain coal immediately from Tigeta because of the suspensive conditions. They're crumbling the theory of an emergency. You follow?
Yeah, I do, but I mean, probably the mistake was to say the resolution grants the right to negotiate and conclude. Normally, in many tender processes, the mandate is given to the negotiating team to negotiate, but not conclude. This forces the issue to come back to the BTC, or whichever board committee. Here, we didn't include that. I think this is what led to this type of thing.
So the mistake was on the part of, what, the board?
Well, I mean, it's now signed on behalf of the board, a mandate which was not given directly like this. It was just a mandate to negotiate.
No, it also said to conclude.
And conclude, yes, but
Yes.
on the basis of what was before us.
Well, let me ask this question. At the time that this round robin resolution was, at the time that you considered it,
Yes.
were you aware that it was saying the board was authorizing the three officials, group executive, chief executive, group executive fourth generation, and the CFO to negotiate and conclude a deal, not with OCM, but with the so-called proposed owners of OCM? Did you understand that at the time, or were you under a different understanding? It's something you picked up later, you heard about later?
Well, I must say, that one beat me because I was thinking in terms of OCM and the business rescue people. But clearly here, it gives them authority to go outside.
Yes. Are you able to throw light on whether maybe other members of the board were under the same understanding as yourself, maybe through discussion afterwards, or do you not know whether other members of the board did understand it that this way and approved it like that?
Well, I think on average, most people would have thought what I did think, that it was to buy pre-purchase coal from OCM.
Okay. Mr. Slater.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Ngubane, then if you go, that's the agreement. Go to page 723.
Of mine?
Yes,
Of this
where we were looking at the agreement, Eskom Bundle 18.
Sorry, page?
723.
723.
Now, their businessman again raises his head. There's an email from businessman to Mr. Machela Koko on the 10th of December 2012. And there's the subject is two-pager. And he deals with what should go into the construction of the guarantee. 2-pager between Tegeta and Eskom, not OCM, Tegeta and Eskom, salient points. Eskom will provide bank guarantee for 1.68 billion. CPs, we understand those are condition precedents. For release is Section 11 approval from TMR, Competitions Commission approval, and then the rest of them. That document gets to be forwarded to Ms. Suzanne Daniels from marcella2010@yahoo.com. These conditions, if you go to page 725, 26, it's an email on 725 from Ms. Daniels on the 10th of December still to Mr. Rishabhan Mutli of CDH. And she's asking for their assistance in drafting the agreement.
CTH, I take it to be Cliff Decker.
CDH is correct, Chairperson.
Yeah,
Cliff Decker Hoffman.
yeah.
That's what she testified yesterday. And if you look at the document on page 726, which she says was an annexure to that email, it reproduces those points you saw in the email of businessmen on the previous page, which is the point the chairperson has been emphasizing, that you see the strings being pulled on Eskom by somebody from outside of Eskom.
Yeah,
You see that?
yeah. I do.
That's the state capture that is being investigated. I think I'm done, not to mention your emails between yourself and businessmen.
With
You and businessmen,
businessmen.
yes, that come in June 2016.
Well, it happened.
Yeah. It's water under the bridge. Chair, that, I think, are the questions I had for Dr. Ngubane.
Well, Dr. Ngubane, I want to hear whether, having learned what you have learned, having read what you have read, having heard what you have heard about matters or things that were happening at Eskom at the time that you were chairperson, whether you do not see the possibility, you don't concede at least to a possibility that during your time at Eskom, there may have been people outside of Eskom who were manipulating, or who may have been manipulating processes within Eskom, maybe also manipulating or using people within Eskom for their own agendas. And before you respond, I go back to just giving you the picture that emerges, and I'm not saying that that's what I believe to be the position, but it's something I can't ignore as I hear more and more evidence. You have a situation where in 2010, December, the new age, such suggest, maybe it's more than a suggestion, that Mr. Brian Molefe is going to be the new Transnet Group CEO. He does become the new Transnet Group CEO. You have, of course, certain things happen at Transnet, transactions and allegations of irregularities while he is there. And then, according to Mr. Hank Bester, it was at some stage in 2014, Mr. Salim Essa tells him, Mr. Brian Molefe is going to be the new boss of Eskom. And then you and your other members of the board are new at Eskom. And out of the blue, the news comes that there must be an inquiry. 4 executives must be suspended at the same time. When you hear about this, you are opposed to this and want to hear from the shareholder minister. She comes and she says what she said, and after that, the board goes along. But the day before, namely the 10th, now we hear that Mr. Salim Essa was meeting with Mr. Koko and with Ms. Daniels and some other time on the same day with Mr. Abraham Masango, and saying to Ms. Daniels, what's the procedure that must be followed if you want to suspend an executive at Eskom? You know, according to Ms. Daniels, that's what Mr. Salim Essa asked, you know. And then Mr. Masango has his version also in terms of what was said. And then after the executives are gone, are suspended, indeed 3 don't come back. Quite some money is spent to let them go. Mr. Koko does come back. And in the meantime, I think about a month or so after the suspension of the executives, Mr. Brian Molefe is seconded to Eskom. And then, of course, on this evidence, and Mr. Koko is still going to come and put his side of the story on some of the things about these emails and so on. But on the face of it, it looks like somebody from outside, businessman, is kind of dictating to Mr. Koko that certain things must happen, and Mr. Koko passes this on to Ms. Daniels, and so on and so on. So when you look at all of those things, and of course, certain transactions happen at Eskom, and there are allegations of irregularities about certain transactions. When you know what you know now, and when I say no, I accept that we haven't had all the evidence, we must still hear more. But on the face of it, do you think that the possibility that there were people outside of Eskom who may have been manipulating Eskom processes, maybe also manipulating some people within Eskom or using them for their own agendas, is far-fetched?
Well, it's quite disturbing, because what we read here should never have happened. I mean, people actually dictating to us, remove PFMA, the board must do this. So, however, one must also bear in mind that I think it's a bigger problem we have as a country, the issue of governance. So I don't know how to frame it, but I see it as a problem that the country faces. Why is information leaking? I mean, there were accusations, for instance, that the Gupta family was appointing ministers
Yes,
and
yes.
things like that.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
why are we having all that sort of thing? So the suggestion that there were people manipulating, I agree, but I think it's a bigger problem.
Yeah, okay.
Chair, may I?
Anything arising?
May I?
Yeah.
Dr. Ngubane, I had said that I will touch on the penalties. You know, those penalties were settled, well, there was a settlement agreement with Tegeta ultimately in 2017 on those penalties. You know that. The 2.17 billion
You're right.
was settled at 599 million rand in terms of the agreement. It's a significant drop.
Well, as far as I know, it was the arbitration process
Yes,
that came to that.
yes,
And if OCM had gone to arbitration,
yes.
most probably they'll have got the same result.
But isn't the position that it was not the result of an arbitration, it was the result of negotiations?
Correct.
You remember when you said, I think you said Mr. Brian Molefe adopted a hard attitude towards OCM because they were taking all the cream and giving it to overseas and giving you all the rubbish and so on. And I said, well, I think Mr. Silega will say, but they might not have been hard on Tegeta. So the picture that emerged, at least on what we know now, Mr. Brian Molefe is still going to come and put his side of the story and put his perspective. Maybe that will change when he has done that. But at this stage, the picture seems to be that when OCM was there, Mr. Brian Molefe, Eskom through Mr. Brian Molefe, didn't even want to negotiate. And yet, when it was Tegeta, one, they were prepared to negotiate. Not just negotiate, agree to a significant reduction of the penalties from 2 billion
To 599.
to 599 million.
And
Well,
the story doesn't end there,
Yeah,
Dr. Ngubane. Then there are deductions on that amount that reduces it further to 255 million rand.
yes.
And it doesn't end there. Tegeta is given 20 months to pay in installment. But it doesn't end there. Tegeta defaults after paying 121 million rand. And it remains with a balance of over 130 million rand before it goes into business rescue. And Eskom has lost.
Yeah. Well, I think Ms. Daniels will have better knowledge of these processes, because she was obviously a legal person, advisor, and company secretary. But on the face of it, it's a discrepancy that is significant, you know.
Chair, I'm going to finalize with this because this is two important aspects.
Yeah, okay.
Ms. Daniels hasn't finished testifying, Dr. Ngubane. She has an email attached to her affidavit. And I want to get your view on this as we talk about the seriousness of the control and the lack of corporate governance. On the same bundle, Eskom bundle 18, page 288. I'm going to take you back and show you what is happening within your board. not by yourself. Page 288. Now, this is an email exchanged on the 22nd of November 2015. Is the build-up to December 2015. It's a parallel process. Bear in mind, because Tegeta wants to acquire OCM. Tegeta wants to acquire OCM. They have offered 2.1 billion to buy that mine. And the evidence as we see it is that this prepayment resolution we went through, which becomes a guarantee, the actual intention is to assist Tegeta in acquiring OCM. But before they could conclude the agreement, which is concluded on the 10th, incidentally on the 10th of December, the very day Mr. Arnold Singh is signing this guarantee and the pre-purchase agreement, you, before that, see this email on 22nd November 2015. It's from Mr. Mark Paminsky, one of your board members. He's writing to Atul at ANN7.com. And there's Varun, meeting of even date is the subject, and he says, "Hi, Chair. Thank you for the conversation."
Who is the chair he's referring to?
Sorry, Chairperson.
Who is the chair he's referring to?
The chairperson seems to be Mr. Atul Gupta,
Okay.
who was, let's see, if you turn the page, Chairperson, he's the chairman of TNA. The signature on the email that I will come to after this
Yes,
one.
okay.
So he said, "Hi, Chair. Thank you for the conversation today. I will action all the items and ensure that they are completed. I will send an email to Terry regarding the lead independent." I want to get to the paragraph I want to. "We will have the Shiva uranium board sorted out."
I'm sorry, Mr. Silega.
Yes, Chair.
So that email address, that email at page 288, bundle 18 of Eskom, is from Mr. Mark Paminsky. Is that
Correct,
right?
Chair.
And on email address markpem2@mark.com.
Yes.
And then there is mail to markpem2@mark.com. It's dated 22 November 2015 at 7:40 in the morning or PM
It's
in
PM.
the afternoon, yeah.
Yes.
It's 7:40.
22/8.
Yeah, PM. And then it's addressed to atul@ann7.com.
Yes.
Mail to atul@ann7.com. And it's copied to varun@shiva.com. Mail to varun@shiva.com. And the subject is meeting of even date.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to capture that into the
Correct, Chair.
record. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I've read "Hi, Chair," then he goes on to other paragraphs. Paragraph number 1, 2, 3, 4, starting with the words "in terms of." Says, "In terms of investment committee, I am available to start straight away." Now, Chair, Dr. Ngubane, Mr. Paminsky, Mark Paminsky, at this time he's a member of the board at Eskom. This is November 2015.
In November 2015,
Yes?
you confirmed.
You confirm. Yeah. He says, "In terms of investment committee, I am available." Oh, sorry. He was the chairperson of the IFC. He's the one who recused himself in December.
Yes.
So in terms of investment committee, I'm available to start straight away. As I'm at the tail end of the main acquisition of optimal coal, please ensure that a condition precedent is that the 2 billion rand claim from Eskom is withdrawn, or it becomes the seller's problem. I'm happy to get involved to assist with the acquisition and monthly monitoring/analyzing of all investments from today I can meet anyone you require. If you need me in India or Dubai to discuss, I'll meet you there. Travel safe and look forward to seeing you soon. Once again, thank you for today. Kind regards, Mark. He seems to be talking about Tegeta acquiring Optima. He's telling this Mr. Atul Gupta, let the condition precedent of 2 billion rand, which is the penalties, let it be withdrawn, or let it be the problem of the seller being Optimum. You see that?
Yeah.
Before the deal is made. Now you were sketching out the problem in corporate governance, the problem which seems to be inherent in our system. Talk of it. This cannot be any more evident of that problem.
Yeah.
You see that?
No, I see that.
Did
Yeah.
he?
Okay, Dr. Ngubane, I know it might be a long day, but it's important for the recording to capture your response.
right.
Yeah.
Well,
you said you do see that, is that right?
I do see that,
Yes.
Chairperson.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, let me put it like that. Yeah.
Did you suspect anything on his part at the time?
No, not at all.
Did you know that he was a director, I understand, in Obey?
Well, he had recused himself from issues
So that tells the
pertain-
story.
Yes.
That tells the story.
But, well, one didn't know that he was
Yeah,
that active.
yeah. Because the email above, which is forwarded, it seems, from Atul Gupta on the 22nd of November, it's sent to Shivani, it's the same meeting, and to Rajesh Gupta Tony at sahara.co.za. But it doesn't end there, Dr. Ngubane. And this may well explain what we were talking about, the penalties. That significant drop of the penalties from 2.1 billion to 5 with deductions made to it becomes 255 million. Even that 2.5 is only partly paid.
Yeah.
And then to get a default. You turn the next page. Go to the next page. This is on the day of the agreement on both sides, between OCM and Tegeta, and between Tegeta and Eskom, which is Mr. Singh's doing. The email below that page 289, Eskom Bundle 18, is on the 10th of December 2015 at 22:32. Now that's 28 minutes before 11 at night. Also coming from Mr. Mark Paminsky, the same email address. Oh no, this is mark@blts.co.za. Do you know what BLTS stands for, Dr. Ngubane?
Sorry?
Do you know what BLTS stands for?
Sorry, just which part?
Where is BLT?
The middle of in his email address, Chairperson, mark@blts.co.za.
Oh, okay.
Yes, because that's the first, you always have to read them from bottom up, these emails. Just show Dr. Ngubane.
No, I see the.
You see it?
This, yeah, marketbills.co.za,
Yeah.
right?
Did you know what that BLTS stands for?
I'm sure,
His company or something.
yeah, it's a company address, I'm sure.
So he says that.
It was Blue Label,
Or Blue Label.
yes,
Yeah, he worked for Blue Label.
yeah.
He says, hi, Chair. The email, well, we don't see who is it addressed to, but you see the response at the top. Let's read the message first. It says, hi, Chair, congratulations. Then there's that word in brackets, Mazel Tov. You can assist us there, Dr. Ngubane. Congratulations on a brilliant and well thought out, planned and strategized acquisition of the Optimum Group of companies. Well done. I'm proud of you all. This is only the beginning of the resource group growth, and many more to come into play. I'm more than sure that you and the team will make a huge success of this acquisition. I wish you all the success on the deal. The hard work begins now, and we as a team will produce the results. Let me know when you're ready to discuss the operational implementation. I am truly proud to be part of this group. Enjoy the well-deserved holiday, Mark.
Well, Chairperson, that's capitalism at its best.
Within the board. Yeah, I can almost picture him punching the air with his fist.
Well, Dr. Ngubane, if you go back to Mr. Pamensky's letter or email at 288, the one where Mr. Sleka started, which is addressed to Mr. Atul Gupta, it seems to me that if you ask somebody to make another company withdraw a claim of 2 billion rand, must be that you think that person is very powerful.
Yeah.
By any standards, that's a huge claim. To expect that that person can get it withdrawn, it just seems that you must be thinking, so Mr. Pamensky must have been thinking that Atul was capable of achieving that.
Yeah.
Is that a sentiment that you find also that would resonate with you?
Well, I always thought it was the arbitrator,
Yes.
but now clearly there is some other
Negotiations.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, all right, Mr. Sleka.
Yes, no, it wasn't the arbitrator at all. They settled, saying there were errors in the calculations. That's what they said. But go back to page 289, Dr. Ngubane, so we can, you see there's a response then at the top of that page. Response to Mr. Mark Pamensky's email of 10 December. That response is from Atul Gupta, Atul at ANN7.com, is to Mark Pamensky. And that is, I think they swapped the date and the month, judging from the previous email. So that would be on the 12th of November. Or the 11th of December. Well, no,
Yeah, it
the
must be
11th of December.
11th of December.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. I could hear the message from my right eye chair.
Yeah.
And it's copied to Varun and to Rajesh Gupta Tony. He says, Atul Gupta, hi. Thank you, Mark, bro. I really appreciate it. We'll talk soon. Regards, Atul Gupta, Chairman, TNA Media, Pty Ltd. And that's the correspondence between the parties. So even the board, some board or one board member at the very least, seems to have assisted the Guptas in the acquisition of Optimum.
Well, I don't think you can accuse the board of assisting. Obviously, this was an individual,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah. But
Of course, if in the end that deal was brought to the board and the board approved, it would be legitimate to ask the board to explain. You accept that. A claim of 2 billion rand going down to
599.
it would be legitimate to, I mean, I haven't checked. I assume that for such a big amount, before they settled, whoever was negotiating would need that to be brought to the board to approve. I'm assuming because it's a big amount.
It was never brought to the board,
It
Chairperson.
was never brought to
No.
the board.
That's why I was suggesting probably Ms. Daniels
Arbitration.
as the legal person might shed light on
Yes,
the processes there.
yes. But on your own understanding, any negotiations that led to an agreement where Eskom's claim of 2 billion rand was reduced to 500 and something million or 200 and something million should have been brought to the board for the board to approve, isn't it? It's too big an amount to say it should be dealt with by somebody else, I would imagine.
Well, I would say so, Chairperson, because we were seized with the issue of penalties.
Yes, yes, yes.
And they influenced a lot of thinking
Yes,
on the
yes,
side of the board.
Yes, yes. Okay, but you say definitely it was not brought to
No,
the board?
it was not.
Yeah. Okay. Mr.
Well,
Slager?
So Richard, Dr. Ngubane, Ms. Daniels hasn't finished testifying. But isn't it that she had submitted a memorandum to the board?
Yes.
Yes. And she requested a mandate for Mr. Anoch and I think Mr. Koko to be authorized to do the settlement because she didn't want to do it herself. The board had said she should do it, and she said, no, you authorized these two executives. And this was prior to the settlement. And in her memorandum to the board, proposed an amount by which the settlement should be concluded. And she was told, no less than 500 million. Settle, but no less than 500 million. But the authorization was then by the board given to Mr. Anoch and Mr. Koko.
Not by the IFC?
I don't know, but I know that from my reading of the documents, the memorandum is made to the board. And the request is that the board should authorize the two executives.
I don't remember it, Chairperson. Do you have the document?
Oh, she says, I presented to BTC. Sorry, to BTC, but the board tender committee was chaired by you.
Mr. Koz?
Was it chaired by Mr. Koza?
Yeah.
There was a time it was chaired by you,
Yeah, much
very,
earlier.
very short time.
for a short time.
Yeah. Once I became acting chairperson, I stopped chairing PTC.
Yeah, sorry, that was, she says BTC.
Okay.
But I guess even the BTC, for writing off, in effect, such a big amount,
Yeah.
they would have need to make sure that the board went along with it. I would imagine.
They would probably need to make sure that IFC approved it and then reported to the board.
Yes, yes, yeah. Okay.
That's it from our side, Chairperson. That's it from our
Okay,
side.
all right.
Yes.
Will this mean we are done with Dr. Ngubane, or are there some matters that you will still come back for?
Yeah.
Or you are not sure?
I know Chair and I spoke this morning.
Oh, yes, about other matters.
Yes. And
Yeah. So you will talk to him in due course if you need to.
I think that will be the way
Yeah.
forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ngubane. We are done with you for today, but the work of the commission continues, and if we ask you to come back, I'm sure you will cooperate again as you have done all along.
Not on New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve, Chairperson.
That's when we are free, Dr.
Yes, yes. But before we finish, Mr. Mkhabela, you don't have any re-examination, is it?
Not from our side, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much, Dr. Ngubane, and we are going to adjourn for lunch, and then
Thank you.
I will resume at 2:15 with another work stream. We adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.